Good evening and welcome. Get comfortable. Turn the lamp down or off entirely if that suits you better. Settle your shoulders into whatever you are lying on and let your breathing slow a little, because tonight we are going somewhere very early and very dark, and there is no hurry about any of it. Tonight we are going to spend a morning in a house in London in 1879. Not the whole day, just the morning, and not even the part of the morning most people would recognize as morning. We are going to arrive at 5:15 when the street outside is black and silent and the milk has not yet come, and we are going to stay until 9 when the first bedroom bell rings upstairs and the family finally begins to stir. 4 hours. That is all we are covering, and it will take us a long while to cover it, because a great deal happens in those 4 hours, and almost none of it was ever meant to be seen. Here is the picture most of us carry, whether we have ever thought about it or not. A tall Victorian house, handsome, respectable, with a polished door and a brass knocker. Inside, everything is warm and in order. The fires are burning in the grates by the time anyone comes downstairs. The hall smells faintly of beeswax. Breakfast is on the sideboard, hot under covers, and the coffee is fresh. Somewhere in the background there are servants, and in the picture we carry, they are essentially furniture that moves. A girl in a cap crossing a landing. A cook glimpsed through a doorway. They appear when required and dissolve when not. They are part of the scenery of the house, like the wallpaper, like the umbrella stand, and the house itself seems to have generated its own warmth and its own breakfast, quietly, on its own, while everyone slept. That picture is not wrong about the warmth, or the breakfast, or the polish. Those things were genuinely there. What the picture is wrong about is the word slept. The house did not sleep, not the whole house. At 5 in the morning, when the family's bedrooms were dark and still and the curtains drawn, the house was not resting. It was working harder than it would work at any other point in the entire day. Somewhere below the family, and above them too, in the basement and in the attic, and on the back stairs in between, a small number of people were moving through the cold in near darkness, raking out dead fires, hauling coal, carrying water up flights of stairs, scrubbing a doorstep white, blacking a range, trimming lamp wicks, so that 4 hours later a man in a dressing gown could come down and find the room warm and think nothing of it at all. That was the point. Thinking nothing of it was the product. Not the fire, not the breakfast, not the shine on the fender. The thing being manufactured in those dark hours was the impression that nothing had been manufactured, that the house was simply like this, that warmth was its natural condition and cleanliness its resting state, and that the morning had arrived complete, the way weather arrives. So the invisibility was not an accident of poor record-keeping. It was not that nobody bothered to write down what the servants did. The invisibility was engineered. It was built into the architecture, into the timetable, into the rules of behavior, into the design of the staircases. A well-run household of this period was one in which the labor that sustained it was structurally impossible to observe, and the people who performed it moved through corridors specifically built so that they would not be encountered. We will walk down one of those staircases shortly. You will feel how narrow it is. Tonight, then, you are not going to watch this from the drawing room. You are going to do it. You are going to be the housemaid. You will wake in an attic in a house you do not own, in a bed you did not choose, at an hour set by somebody else, with no clock of your own. You will dress in the dark, because a candle is a cost. You will go down 5 flights of stairs without making a sound, because being heard is a fault, and you will arrive in a kitchen where the range has gone out and the stone floor is cold through your shoes, and you will begin. We will take it slowly. We will go hour by hour, and every so often we will stop and step back and look at the wider thing behind whatever you happen to be holding. When you lay the drawing room fire, we will talk about coal, how much a London house burned in a year, what it cost, how it got into the cellar, and why the whole of the day's schedule hung on getting that fire to draw. When you carry water upstairs, we will talk about plumbing, and about the strange fact that new household technology in this period so often added tasks rather than removing them. When you scrub the front step until it shows white, we will talk about what a dirty doorstep said to the street, and about the neighborhood surveillance that made that scrubbing non-negotiable. And when you sit down for 10 minutes to eat bread and dripping at the kitchen table, we will talk about the hierarchy at that table, which was as carefully graded as anything upstairs. We will talk about money at some length, because the numbers are genuinely interesting and because they anchor everything else. £16 a year, paid quarterly. What that bought in 1879, what the cook earned by comparison, and the footman, and why the difference mattered. We will talk about the letter of character, that short written reference from a former employer, and how completely it governed a young woman's ability to work at all. And we will talk about scale, because domestic service was not a curiosity of the wealthy few. It was the largest single employer of women in Britain. When you picture the Victorian working woman, the factory hand is the image that usually arrives. The housemaid is the more accurate one. None of this is going to be grim. I want to say that plainly, because a story about hard work before dawn could easily be told as a catalogue of misery, and that is not what this is. The work was hard, and the hours were long, and the structure was unjust in ways we will name clearly as we go. But the woman doing it was not a victim wandering through her own morning. She was skilled. She knew exactly how long a fire took to draw, and exactly how many minutes she had to spare, and she knew which room had to be warm before which person came downstairs, and she was running that calculation continuously in her head, while her hands did something else. There is real competence here. There is even, at moments, satisfaction. We will hold both things at once, the skill and the structure, and we will not pretend either one away. If you enjoy these, it does help enormously if you subscribe, and I would genuinely like to know where you are listening from and what time it is where you are. People leave those comments at all hours from all over the world, and reading them is one of the better parts of making these. But do that tomorrow, not now. Now, put the phone down. Let the room go soft. Let your jaw unclench, and your shoulders come away from your ears, and your hands open. It is 1879. It is the middle of March, which means the mornings are still properly dark and still properly cold, and there is frost on the inside of some windows in this city. We are going to a tall, narrow, respectable house in Bloomsbury, 5 stories of brick, with a black railing at the front, and steps down to a basement area. Inside, on the 2nd floor, a family is asleep. On the 4th floor, under the slope of the roof, in a room with 1 small window and no fire, 2 young women are also asleep, and one of them is about to wake. The street outside is empty. The gas lamps are still burning at the corners, small and yellow, with a ring of damp around each one. There is no traffic yet. Somewhere, a long way off, a dog is barking, and somewhere much closer, a cart is moving slowly on the cobbles, and other than that, the city is as quiet as it ever gets. It is 4:45 in the morning. The house is not asleep. You are. Not for much longer. You are 19 years old. That is the first thing to settle, because everything else sits on top of it. You are 19. You have been in service since you were 16, and this is your second place. The first was a smaller household in a suburb north of here, a widow and her sister and one other girl, and you left it with a written character in your box, and no hard feelings on either side. You came into this house last spring. You are the housemaid. The room you are lying in is at the top of the house, under the roof, and the roof is the ceiling. There is no attic above you, and no plaster arch between you and the slates. If you sit up too quickly in the wrong half of the bed, you will knock your head, and you have, more than once, in your first weeks here, and you do not anymore. Your body has learned the shape of the room, the way it learns everything else in this house, without being told twice. The bed is narrow and iron-framed, with a flock mattress that has gone hard in the middle and soft at the edges, which is the opposite of what you would want. There are 2 blankets, a coverlet, and your own shawl laid over your feet, because 2 blankets in March, in an unheated room at the top of a London house, is not enough, and you worked that out in your first winter. Against the opposite wall, 3 feet away, there is a second bed exactly like it, and in it is the kitchen maid, who is 17, and who snores lightly, with her mouth open, and who will not wake for another quarter of an hour. Between the beds there is a washstand, with a chipped basin and a jug that has ice on it, perhaps a dozen mornings a year, and has a skin of cold on it every other morning from October to April. There is a strip of drugget on the floorboards, a piece of old carpet cut down, laid where your feet will land. There is a hook on the back of the door, and on the hook is your afternoon dress, hanging straight, because a dress hung crooked overnight will keep the crease all day, and there is nobody here to iron it out for you. And there is your box. The box is the important thing, and it is worth pausing on, because if you want to understand a servant's life in this period, you can very nearly understand it from the box alone. It is wooden, about the size of a small sea chest, banded with iron at the corners, and it stands at the foot of your bed, because there is nowhere else for it to stand. It has a lock. The lock matters. It is very likely the only lock in your life that answers to you. Inside, it is everything you own. 2 print dresses for morning work. The afternoon dress on the door, which is black, and a second one folded beneath the tray. 4 aprons, in 2 grades, the coarse ones for the fires and the grates, and the white ones with the bib and the strings that you put on later, when you might be seen. Caps, stockings, darned at the heel more than once. A pair of house shoes with the soles worn thin, and a pair of stouter boots for the street on your afternoon out. A hairbrush, a prayer book, given to you at 14, and not opened as often as the giver would like. A tin box within the box, smaller, with a lid that fits badly, and in that tin is your money. Your wage is £16 a year. Hold that figure, because we will be coming back to it repeatedly through the morning, and it explains a great deal that would otherwise look like mystery or like meanness. £16 a year, paid quarterly, which means £4 handed to you 4 times a year, in the housekeeper's absence by the mistress herself, in a small transaction that takes under a minute and is written into a book afterward. On top of that, you have your food, your bed, your candles within reason, and your beer money, which in this house is not beer at all, but a small allowance in coin instead, because the mistress disapproves of the older arrangement and has said so. £4. 4 times a year. Out of it come your own dresses, your own boots, your own stockings, your own thread and needles and hairpins, and whatever you send home, and you do send home. Not much, not always, but you do. Now, the cold. It is worth being accurate about the cold, because it is the actual physical fact of this hour, and it is the thing that most reconstructions of the period leave out. There is no fire in this room, and there never has been. There is a small grate in the wall, blocked, unused, because a fire in a servant's bedroom would mean fuel carried up 5 flights, and a chimney swept, and a risk taken, and none of those things are going to be spent on the 4th floor. The window is single glazed, and the frame does not sit tight. There is a draft along the floor, and a second draft down the chimney, and the air in the room this morning is somewhere near freezing. So you sleep in more than a nightdress. You sleep in stockings. Most girls in your position do, whatever the advice manuals of the period suggest about the virtue of fresh air and the healthiness of a cool bedroom. The people writing those manuals were not sleeping under slates in March. The smell of the room is a specific one, and you have long ago stopped noticing it. Cold plaster, old wood, candle tallow, because your candlestick is tin and cheap, and the candle in it is not the good wax kind that goes downstairs. Under all of that, faintly, from far below and from the whole city, the smell of coal, which is not the smell of a fire, but the smell of yesterday's fires, settled into the brick and the curtains and the hair on your head. In 1879, in London, everything smells very slightly of coal all the time, and the people who live there do not know it until they leave and come back. The house beneath you is arranged in a way that would seem strange to a modern eye and is entirely logical once you see the point of it. On the ground floor, the dining room at the front and the breakfast room behind. On the first floor, the drawing room, running the full depth of the house, with folding doors in the middle so that it can be 1 room or 2. On the second floor, the master and mistress, in separate but adjoining rooms, which is ordinary at this level of society and means nothing dramatic. Above them, on the third, the children, 3 of them, and the room for the girl who looks after them. And then the stairs narrow, the carpet stops, the banister loses its polish, and the last flight goes up to you. That is not accidental. The carpet stopping is the whole design. Below that line, the house is a performance. Above it, the house is a workplace, and it is allowed to look like one. 6 of you keep this house running. There is the cook, who is in her 40s, who has been here longer than the family have had this address, and who owns the kitchen in a way the mistress does not seriously contest. There is the parlour maid, who is 24 and waits at table and answers the front door and is therefore the servant the family's visitors actually see. There is the nurse, upstairs with the children, who occupies a slightly separate world and does not scrub anything. There is the kitchen maid asleep 3 feet away from you, who is 17 and does the vegetables and the scullery and the worst of the pots. There is a boy who comes in daily for the boots and the coal and the heavy carrying and goes home at night to his mother in a street off the Gray's Inn Road. And there is you. The family is 4 adults' worth of expectation and 3 children. The master is a solicitor with chambers within walking distance. The mistress runs the household, which is to say, she gives instructions and settles accounts and holds the standard in her head against which everything is measured. Here is the thing that the whole arrangement depends on, and I want to say it plainly now, at the beginning, because everything that happens between this moment and 9 o'clock is an illustration of it. The family will come down at 8:30 into a house that is warm, lit, swept, polished, laid and provisioned. Fires burning in 3 rooms, hot water standing at their washstands, the steps outside white, the brass at the door bright, coffee hot and not stewed, boots clean, knives clean, lamps trimmed and filled and ready for tonight. And their honest experience of that will be that the house is simply like that. Not that it was made like that it is like that. The way weather is like something. They are not lying to themselves in any deliberate way. They have never been in the room at 5 in the morning. They have no reason to picture it, and nobody is going to describe it to them, least of all you. That gap is not a byproduct of the arrangement. It is the arrangement. What you are actually employed to produce 4 hours from now is not clean grates. It is the impression that clean grates happened by themselves. The concealment is the product. The labor is only how the concealment is achieved. So that is where we are. 4th floor, iron bed, 2 blankets and a shawl, ice or nearly ice on the water in the jug, a wooden box with a lock, and inside it a tin, and inside the tin some coins that came out of £16 a year, a dress on a hook, a candle in a tin candlestick on the floor beside you, with a box of matches next to it, placed there last night by your own hand, precisely there, because you will be reaching for it in the dark, and you will not have time to feel about for it. Below you, the whole house is cold and dark and entirely still. In a moment you are going to open your eyes, and none of that stillness will survive it. You open your eyes. There is no clock in this room. That is worth sitting with for a moment, because it is one of those small absences that shapes an entire life and almost never gets mentioned. You do not own a watch. There is no timepiece on the wall, no ticking on the chest of drawers, nothing on the floor beside the candle. The only clocks in this house are downstairs, in the rooms the family uses, and in the kitchen passage where the cook can see one. Time, in a house like this, is a thing that lives on the ground floor and comes upstairs only as instruction. And yet you wake at 5:15, and you wake at 5:15 tomorrow, and you woke at 5:15 yesterday, and you will keep doing it for as long as you hold this place. Some of that is the body learning what it is required to learn. 3 years of rising in the dark trains something in you that does not need a bell. Some of it is the kitchen maid beside you, who wakes badly and noisily, and often earlier than she needs to. Some of it, in certain streets and certain trades, is a man paid a few pence a week to come along the terrace with a long pole and tap at bedroom glass until he sees a face, though in a house like this one, with a cook who considers oversleeping a moral failing rather than an accident, the arrangement is generally handled indoors and handled sharply. Mostly it is fear, and it is worth being honest about that, rather than dressing it up. Not fear of anything dramatic. Fear of being the reason the water is late. Fear of the cook's face. Fear of the slow accumulation of small failures that ends, eventually, in a conversation about whether you are suited to the work. The body learns very quickly to wake before that conversation can happen. So you wake. The room is black. The slope of the roof is close enough above your face that on your first night here, 3 years ago, you sat up too fast and struck your head on it, and you have never done so since. That is the sort of thing a body learns even faster than time. You reach for the candle. It is exactly where you left it, because you put it there yourself, deliberately, the way you do every night. The matches are beside it. You strike one, and the room comes into being around you in a small yellow circle, and the first thing the light shows you is your own breath. Now the dressing. And the dressing is not a small matter. You get out from under the blankets into air that is genuinely cold, and the cold is the reason you dress in a particular order and at a particular speed. Stockings first, always, then the shift and the petticoats, and there are more of them than a modern imagination allows for, because layers are how a person keeps warm in a house where only the family's rooms get fires and your room gets nothing at all. Then the stays, laced by feel, because you have laced them in the dark several hundred times. Then the dress. The dress is print cotton. It matters that it is print cotton and not black. And it matters that it is this dress and not the other one hanging beside it. In the morning, when the work is dirty work, coal and ash and blacklead and slops and scrubbing, you wear a washable print, usually something small patterned in blue or lilac or grey, because a pattern hides a mark and a plain colour advertises one. Over it goes a coarse apron, a heavy working apron, the sort of thing meant to be ruined. And later, in the afternoon, when the dirty work is done and the family are at home, and callers may come, you will change. Black dress, white cap, a clean white apron, small and fine, and quite useless for actual work, more or less a decoration in the shape of a garment. Two different women, wearing two different sets of clothes, doing two different kinds of visible labor, in one body, in one day. Let me put some numbers against those clothes, because the numbers are the part nobody thinks about. You earn £16 a year. In most houses of this sort, the print dresses and the aprons and the caps come out of your own pocket. The employer provides the roof, the bed, the food, and the wage. What appears in the doorway of the drawing room, correctly dressed, is your own responsibility to assemble and to purchase and to keep in repair. A serviceable print dress, made up, might cost you something between 8 and 12 shillings, and there are 20 shillings in a pound. A good black stuff dress for afternoons, the one that has to look right in front of visitors, will cost more, perhaps 15 shillings or upwards of a pound if you want it to last. Caps and aprons, several of each, because they must always be clean, add up in shillings that never quite stop adding. Boots are the cruelest item on the list, because boots are expensive and you spend the entire day on stairs. Set that against £16. A single black dress can take a full quarter of a year's wage, and there is no separate allowance for it, no clothing fund, no reimbursement, because the arrangement quietly assumes that a girl in service has no other expenses worth speaking of, and that assumption is the reason employers could pay what they paid. Which brings up the thing about servant clothing that gets least attention. Much of the time, it was not a uniform at all in the way we mean the word. In grand establishments, in the great country houses with 40 indoor staff, livery for the men was provided and specified down to the buttons. But in a professional family's house in Bloomsbury, with 6 indoor servants, what governs your appearance is not a supplied costume. It is a rule, unwritten and absolutely rigid, that says a servant must be identifiable as a servant at a glance and must never be mistaken for one of the family or for a visitor. Print in the morning, black in the afternoon, cap always. You buy the components. The house supplies the rule. Cap on, then, and pinned. Hair up and pinned tighter, because hair that comes down over a grate is hair that catches soot and hair that catches the cook's opinion. You take the candle. You go out onto the landing, and here begins the part of the morning that a house of this period was physically designed to make possible, which is that you must now travel from the top of the building to the bottom of it without being heard. 5 flights. You are on the 4th floor, in the attic story. Below you sleep the family, the master and mistress on the 1st floor, the children and the nursery above them. Between you and the kitchen, there are 2 floors of sleeping people, and the single most important quality you can possess at this hour is silence. So you go down the back stairs. Every house of any pretension in this period has 2 staircases, and they are 2 entirely different objects. The front stair is wide, it is carpeted, it has a polished handrail and a good deal of money spent on the balusters, and it exists to be walked down slowly by people who wish to be seen walking down it. The back stair is narrow, uncarpeted, steep, boxed in by plain plaster walls, badly lit or not lit at all, and it runs from the attic to the basement in the least valuable part of the floor plan. It is not a stair for going up and down. It is a device for making people disappear. The same logic runs through the whole building once you notice it. There is the door, covered in green baize, a coarse woolen cloth tacked to the panels that separates the service side of the ground floor from the family side. The baize is not decorative. It is there to muffle. It deadens the sound of the kitchen and the clatter of the passage and the voices of 6 people working, so that none of it reaches the hall. There is the area at the front, that sunken open well below pavement level, with its own steps down and its own door, so that every delivery and every tradesman and every servant coming or going enters the house beneath the level of the front door and is never seen crossing it. There are the service corridors, the narrow passages, the doors cut flush into paneling. None of this is accident. An architect drew it. A builder built it. Somebody paid for the extra stair and the extra door and the sacrificed floor space, and they paid for it in order to purchase a particular experience for the people living on the good side of the bays, the experience of a house that runs without visible operation. You have soft shoes on, or you are in your stockings with your shoes carried in one hand. You know which of these treads speaks. The 4th one down from the 2nd floor landing has a voice like a cough, and you step over it entirely, and you have stepped over it so many times that your foot does it without consulting you. You keep the candle shielded with your other hand, partly against draught, and partly because light under a bedroom door at 5 in the morning is itself a kind of noise. Down past the nursery floor, down past the family bedrooms, where you slow and where you hold your breath in a way you no longer notice doing. Down past the drawing room floor, cold and shuttered, and waiting for you, its grate full of last night's ash. Down past the hall, down the last flight into the basement, where the air changes, gets thicker and colder at once, and smells of yesterday. And here you are, the kitchen, stone floor, long scrubbed table, the dresser with its ranks of plates, the window high in the wall, at the level of the area outside, showing nothing at all yet, and the range, black and enormous along one wall, with its doors shut and its fire dead out, holding nothing but grey ash and the cold clinker of yesterday's dinner. Everything the house will do today waits on that iron box. Not one drop of hot water, not one slice of toast, not one warm room, not one iron heated for a collar, until you bring it back to life. You set the candle down on the table, you look at it, then you roll your sleeves. The range is not one thing. It is a system, And like every system in this house, it has to be taken apart before it can be made to work. You begin with the ash pan. It sits beneath the firebox, a shallow iron tray, and by this hour of the morning, it holds the whole grey remainder of yesterday, fine as flour and heavier than it looks. You draw it out slowly, both hands, because ash that is disturbed too quickly goes into the air and then into everything, and a kitchen full of drifting ash at 5 in the morning means a cook who has something to say to you at 6. You carry the pan to the scullery and tip it into the ash bin. Some of it goes up anyway. It always goes up. You feel it settle on your forearms and on your eyelashes, and you feel it in your throat, that dry mineral taste that will still be with you at breakfast. Then the clinker. Coal does not burn away to nothing. It leaves behind hard fused lumps, glassy and awkward, and they collect in the firebox and choke the bars, and they have to be raked out with an iron poker and lifted by hand into a bucket. The bars themselves must be cleared, every gap between them opened, because a range with blocked bars will not draw, and a range that will not draw will smoke, and a smoking range at 6:30 is the beginning of a very long day. You work with your fingers where the poker is too clumsy. The lumps are cold now. They are also sharp, and this is the season in which your hands are already split across the knuckles, and there is no point at all in thinking about that. Then the flue. There is a damper at the back, and a soot door, and behind that soot door is the reason the range worked yesterday, and the reason it might not work today. Soot builds. It builds fast, in a range that is lit at 5 and damped down at 11, 365 days a year, and if it is not cleared, it narrows the passage until the draft fails. You open the soot door and draw it out with a small brush and a flat scraper into a second bucket, and this is the dirtiest 10 minutes of the morning, dirtier than the grates upstairs, dirtier than the coal cellar. Soot is not like ash. Soot is greasy. It does not brush off a sleeve. It has to be washed out, and it usually is not, and this is why your print dress is your print dress and not anything better. The blacklead comes last, though not every morning for every surface. Blacklead is a paste, graphite and binder, and you put it on with a brush, and then you take it off again with a second brush and a cloth, and the taking off is the whole labor. Done properly, the iron comes up to a soft, dark shine that will hold for a day or two. Done badly, it streaks, and streaks show, and the cook will see them before anyone else does. Now the lighting itself, which sounds like the simple part and is not. You lay paper first, twisted into loose knots so that air can move between them. Then kindling, which is chopped wood, laid crosswise, not packed. Then small coal on top of that, and only small coal, because a large lump laid on a new fire will smother it as certainly as a wet cloth. The whole business is a negotiation with air. Fire wants air moving through it from below and away above, and every one of these decisions is about keeping that path open. You open the damper wide, you strike a match and put it to the paper in 2 places, and then you wait. And this is the part nobody tells you about before you go into service. There is a moment, perhaps 30 seconds long, in which you cannot tell whether it has caught. The paper flares and the flare is meaningless. Paper will always flare. What matters is the sound underneath it, a low, steady draw, air being pulled up the flue. If you hear it, the fire is alive and you can go and do something else. If you do not hear it, if instead the flame folds back on itself and the smoke comes out into the room instead of going up, then something in the flue is wrong, or the kindling was damp, or you packed the coal too tight, and you must rake the whole lot out and begin again. That failure costs 20 minutes. You do not have 20 minutes. You have never had 20 minutes. This morning, it catches. You hear the draw begin, that soft, continuous rush, like a held breath, being let out very slowly, and you sit back on your heels for exactly as long as it takes to be certain of it. Now, coal. It is worth slowing down for the coal, because the numbers underneath this fire explain a great deal about the house above it. A household of this size, in London, in 1879, will burn somewhere in the region of 10 to 12 tons of coal in a year. Some houses burn more. A house with a large family, many fires, and a cook who bakes will burn more. But 10 tons is a fair figure for a professional family in a 5-story terrace, and 10 tons is not an abstraction when you are the person who moves it. It arrives by cart, and it does not come to the front door. It comes to the pavement, where there is an iron plate set into the flagstones, and beneath that plate is a shaft down into the coal cellar at the front of your basement. The coalman shoulders a sack, tips it into the hole, and the coal goes down with a noise like a small landslide, and dust comes back up out of the shaft in a cloud. And for perhaps an hour after a delivery, there is a fine black film on every surface in the front basement that somebody has to wipe. The price varies with the season and with the quality. Good household coal in London in this period runs to something like 20 to 25 shillings a ton, more in a hard winter when demand is high and the river traffic is slow. Call it £12 a year for the household's coal. £12. Set that beside what you are paid, which is £16 a year, and you have the shape of the thing. This house spends nearly as much on heating itself as it does on the girl who carries the heat from room to room, because it does not walk itself. The coal sits in the cellar in a heap, and every fire in this house is fed by scuttle, and every scuttle is filled by hand with a shovel and carried by hand up the stairs. The drawing-room fire, the dining-room fire, the breakfast-room fire, the bedroom fires in cold weather, and the nursery fire always, because the nursery fire is never allowed to go out. A full coal scuttle weighs something in the region of 30 pounds. You will lift and carry a version of that weight a dozen times today, and more than that tomorrow, and none of it appears anywhere in any account of what a housemaid does, because it is understood to be simply part of the room being warm. Return to the range, which is now beginning to be more than a flicker. Everything that this house will do in the next 5 hours is queued behind this fire. Hot water, first and most urgently, because there are cans to be carried up to washstands at a fixed hour, and the water must be genuinely hot when it arrives, not warm, not tepid. The boiler at the side of the range holds it, and the boiler takes time. Breakfast, obviously, the eggs, the bacon, the kidneys if the master takes them, the toast which must be made at the last possible moment, and the coffee, which must not be allowed to stew, and then the irons later, for collars and cuffs and anything that has come back creased, because irons are heated on the range top and nowhere else. Cold fire, cold house, no breakfast, no water, no clean linen. The whole day hangs off one iron box in a basement, and the whole day therefore hangs off whether a 19-year-old girl got the draft right at 5 in the morning. The kitchen maid comes down while you are still crouched there. She is younger than you, 15, and she looks the way everybody looks at this hour, which is not quite awake behind the eyes. She goes straight to the scullery without much said, because there is a great deal of water to be got on, and vegetables from yesterday to be dealt with, and because the two of you have long since stopped needing to discuss it. And here the borders of the morning become clear, because this kitchen is not yours. The range is the cook's territory once the cook comes down, and the cook will come down at 5:30, and from that moment the fire belongs to her, and you have no more business with it than you have with the contents of her larder. You lit it, you will not tend it. Ownership in a house like this is drawn along lines nobody writes down and everybody knows. The kitchen range and everything on it belong to the cook. The scullery and the rough washing belong to the kitchen maid. The front rooms and the bedrooms and every grate above the basement belong to you, and the dining table and the front door belong to the parlor maid. Step across one of those lines and you will hear about it, not from the mistress, but from the woman whose line it was. So you stand. Your knees are stiff from the stone, your hands are black to the wrist, and there is a smear across your forehead that you cannot see and will not know about for another hour, and the front of your apron has taken the whole of the soot bucket, which is what aprons are for. Above you, 3 floors up, the drawing room is sitting in the dark with a dead grate full of yesterday's ash, and the dining room behind it, and the breakfast room behind that. 3 more fires, 3 more of everything you have just done. You pick up the housemaid's box from where it waits by the door. It is a wooden box with a handle across the middle, and it has been carried up and down these stairs so many times by so many pairs of hands that the handle has worn smooth and slightly hollow where fingers close on it. Inside it, 2 hearth brushes, one stiff and one soft, a dustpan, a tin of blacklead and the brushes that go with it, one for applying and one for polishing, and you keep them separate because mixing them wastes both. A roll of emery paper for the steel, several cloths of graded roughness, the worst of them barely cloth at all now, more a suggestion of what a cloth used to be. A pair of gloves you may or may not bother with, a bottle of turpentine, a box of matches, and a bucket, carried separately in the other hand for the ash. It weighs, altogether, something like 14 pounds. You will carry it up 3 flights, and set it down, and pick it up, and carry it into the next room, and by the end of the morning, your right shoulder will sit a little lower than your left, which is a thing you have stopped noticing, and which the woman who taught you the work carried for the rest of her life. Before you go up, you stop at the kitchen table and take the tea leaves. They are yesterday's, saved in a bowl, wrung out but still damp, and they smell faintly sour in the way wet tea leaves do. Every household in London saves them. You will scatter them across the drawing-room carpet before you sweep, a handful at a time, flicked out low so they land in a spread rather than a heap, and they will do 2 things. The damp will catch the dust that a broom would otherwise lift into the air and set down again 3 feet away, and the leaves themselves will pick up hair and grit and thread as you sweep them across the pile. It is a trick older than anyone can say, and it works, which is why nobody has replaced it. Up then, back stairs, 3 flights, box in the right hand and bucket in the left, and neither of them touching the wall, because a bucket that touches a wall makes a sound, and a sound at 5:30 is a fault. The drawing room, when you come into it, is entirely black, not dim. Black. The shutters are folded across the windows and barred. The curtains are drawn over the shutters, and there is a second set of thinner curtains inside those, so the room has 3 layers of cloth and timber between it and the street. you have a candle in a tin stick. You set it on the floor, near the hearth, because a candle on a table throws its light across the ceiling and does you no good at all, and a candle on the floor throws it exactly where your hands are. By that light, the room resolves into shapes you know by memory anyway. The great mirror over the chimney-piece. The clock beneath it, stopped or ticking. You cannot tell from here. Chairs, a piano with a cloth over it, a quantity of small tables, each with things on it, and every one of those things will have to be lifted and set down again in exactly the position it came from, because the mistress does not know what she would look for, but she would notice. You kneel at the grate. What is in it is the whole of last night, which is to say, a bed of grey ash, some half-burnt coal at the front that did not catch, and underneath, in the bars, a fused grey-brown mass, clinker. You take the front bars down, rake it forward, and shovel it into the bucket, slowly, because a shovel of ash tipped fast will send a cloud up into the room and settle on every surface you are about to clean. The trick is to hold the pan low and let it go in a slide rather than a drop. It still gets into the air. It always gets into the air. It is in your throat within a minute, and it will be there all day. Then the black lead. Here is something worth slowing down for, because blackleading a grate is the piece of housework that most reliably astonishes people who hear about it. The grate is cast iron. Cast iron, left to itself in a coal-burning house in a damp climate, will rust. So the iron is coated with a paste, graphite mostly, mixed with a little binder, and the paste is applied with one brush and then worked with a second brush until the iron comes up to a dull metallic shine like the back of a good stove. And it must be done, or nearly done, every single day, because yesterday's fire has burned the last of it off the hot places. The paste is filthy. It goes on your hands, into the creases of your knuckles, under your nails, and it does not wash out with cold water and lye soap in any thorough way, which is why housemaids' hands looked as they did. Your nails have a permanent grey line at the quick. You gave up on that at 15. 20 minutes at the grate, on your knees, on a hearthstone that is cold enough to ache through your dress. Then the steel. The fender in this room is steel, and the fire irons are steel, and steel in a coal smoke atmosphere will spot with rust in a matter of days. So you take the emery paper, and you go over each one, the poker and the tongs and the shovel and the long flat rail of the fender, rubbing along the grain and never across it, until the surface comes up bright. Then a cloth, then a drier cloth. When it is right, you can see the candle flame in it, doubled and stretched. Nobody will look at it. That is not a complaint. It is a description. The family will sit in this room this evening, and no one will glance at the fender, and if any of them were asked afterwards what the fender was made of, they would very likely not be able to say. The work is only visible in its absence. A dull fender would be noticed instantly. A bright one is simply the condition of the world. Now here is the thing about the dirt itself, and it is worth understanding properly, because the sheer volume of it is what makes this morning make sense. An urban house in 1879 sits inside a permanent low-grade fog of combustion. Every room that is used has a coal fire in it. Every one of those fires puts fine soot into the room as well as up the chimney, particularly when the wind sets wrong and the flue backs. The lighting is gas on the ground floor, and oil lamps and candles elsewhere, and gas burns dirty. It throws up a greasy film that settles on ceilings and on the tops of picture frames and turns white paint yellow in a season. Outside, The entire city is doing the same thing at the same time. 500,000 chimneys. The soot comes in around the sashes, under the doors, down the chimneys when they are cold, and on the clothes and boots of everyone who walks in from the street, where the road surface is a compound of horse dung and mud and grit that is swept but never actually removed. So the dust in this room is not household dust in the modern sense. It is greasy, black, faintly acidic, and it arrives continuously. Curtains have to be shaken, carpets have to be swept daily and beaten in the yard periodically. Ceilings and cornices have to be reached with a long brush. Chimney sweeps come 2 or 3 times a year for each flue and charge by the flue. The whole apparatus of Victorian housework, all of it, exists because the light and heat of the house are produced by setting fire to something in the middle of the room, which is also why the order of the rooms is not arbitrary, and why you are in the drawing room now rather than the breakfast room. The rule is simple, and it runs by the family's clock, not by yours. The breakfast room fire must be alight and drawing well by 7:30, because the master comes down at 8, and the room must be warm when he does. Not warming, warm, which means the fire has had half an hour to get its heat into the walls. That fire is therefore not first, it is last, timed backwards from him. The drawing room and dining room fires are lit later still, because nobody sits in them until the afternoon, but the grates must be done now, cleaned and blackleaded and laid ready, because there will be no other hour in the day when this room is empty and dark, and nobody is offended by the sight of you kneeling in it. That is the actual principle. You are not organizing your morning by efficiency. You are organizing it so that the labor happens in the gaps where no member of the family can see it. Every room has a window of invisibility, and you move through the house from window to window like something crossing a courtyard between the sweeps of a lamp. Which brings you to the shutters. You do not open them yet. You could. There is grey coming at the edges of the world now, and light would make the work faster. But shutters opened at 5:30 tell the street that this is a house in which somebody is up and scrubbing at 5:30, and while every house in the terrace is exactly the same, the pretense is collective and mutual, and nobody breaks it. The shutters come down when the front of the house is fit to be seen and not before. So you work by the one candle, and you move it 3 times as you go, and twice you put your hand on something and identify it entirely by touch. Great done. Fender bright, tea leaves down, swept up, taken away in the pan, hearth washed, and the stone left to dry. Coal laid in the grate ready for the match. Paper, wood, small coal, large coal, in that order, built loose so the air can move through it. Ornaments back on the mantel in their places, your knees complaining, your candle down to a stub, and another in your pocket. Somewhere below you the hall clock goes off, and you count it without meaning to, and it is 6. 2 rooms still to do, and the water not yet carried. 6 is the hour when the house begins to want water, and water is the thing that shapes a housemaid's morning more than any other single substance, because water does not travel by itself. Here is the question that decides how hard your morning is, and it is worth understanding before you pick up a single can. Where is the tap? In this house, there is one in the scullery, at the back of the basement, fed from a cistern under the roof, which is filled from the main. That is better than a great many houses in London in this year, where the supply comes to a standpipe in the yard shared between several families, and better than the older arrangement where the company turned the water on for 2 or 3 hours on certain days and everyone stood ready with every vessel they owned. Your household has water whenever the cistern has water. The cistern is lead-lined, and it sits above the top landing, and it is filled by a pipe that runs up the back of the building, and the whole system exists so that water can be delivered to a point in the basement, not to the bedrooms, to the basement. So the water arrives at the lowest point in the house, and the people who want it are at the top, and between the two there is you. You fill the copper first, because everything that follows needs hot water, and the copper takes time. The copper is a great fixed vessel set in brickwork in the scullery, with its own small fire beneath it, and it is not a kettle, it is closer to a small boiler, and when it is full, it holds enough for the family's washstands and something over. You fill it by hand, a pail at a time from the tap 2 steps away, and lighting the fire under it is a second fire to manage, with its own flue and its own moods, and by now you have lit 2 fires before daylight, and neither of them was allowed to fail. While it heats, you carry cold. A tin water can of the kind used for a bedroom holds something around 1.5 gallons when full, and 1 gallon of water weighs 10 pounds. So a full can is 15 pounds of water and better than 1 pound of tin, carried in one hand up flights of stairs without slopping it on the treads, because slopped water on a stair carpet is a stain, and a stain is a fault, and a fault is remembered. You carry 2 cans where you can, 1 in each hand, which balances you but doubles the weight, and you go up on the balls of your feet with your elbows locked out from your sides. Consider the arithmetic of one morning, because the arithmetic is the whole story. There are 4 family bedrooms in use. Each wants a can of hot for washing and a can of cold beside it. That is 8 cans, and the cans do not come from the same place, and the hot ones come from a copper in the basement and go to the 2nd and 3rd floors, which is 4 flights, and the cold ones the same. Add the water for the front steps, which is a pail. Add the water for the hall floor. Add whatever the cook wants brought while you happen to be passing, because you are always happening to be passing. By the time the family are eating breakfast, you have carried something in the region of 30 gallons of water up and down the height of a 5-story house, which is 300 pounds of water moved, most of it upward, all of it before 9 in the morning, and none of it counted as a task in itself. It is simply what a housemaid does, in the way that breathing is what a person does. This is worth slowing down for, because it explains something about the century that is easy to get backwards. The 1800s are usually described as the period in which domestic technology arrived, and in a narrow sense that is true. Piped water reached most of London by the middle of the century. Cisterns replaced daily collection. Gas came into houses for light and later for cooking. Ranges replaced open hearths. Every one of those things is a genuine improvement over what came before, and nobody who had carried water from a standpipe in a frosty yard would have argued otherwise. But look at what each improvement actually did inside a household of this class, and a pattern appears. Piped water to the basement did not remove the carrying, it moved the starting point of the carrying. And because water was now easier to obtain, the standard of what a household expected rose to meet it. A family that had once washed from a shared basin in a cold room now expected hot water delivered to each individual bedroom every morning, and expected it at a set hour, and expected a hip bath filled on bath nights, and expected the linen washed more often, because washing was less trouble than it had been. The technology did not reduce the labor, it raised the standard, and the standard consumed the saving, and the saving went into the arms of the person carrying the cans. The same thing happens all through the century in miniature. The range burns less coal than an open fire and cooks better, and so the family expects hot dishes at breakfast rather than cold. Gaslight is cleaner than oil, and so rooms are lit for longer in the evening and are therefore used for longer and are therefore dirtier. Cheap cotton makes more clothing affordable, and so there is more clothing to wash. Each innovation is real, and each one is absorbed by a rise in expectation, and the labor stays roughly where it was, only differently shaped. The upstairs bathroom, the thing that would eventually end this particular form of work, is coming, but it is coming slowly, and it is coming from the top of society downward. In grand new houses of the 1870s, you will find a fitted bathroom with a boiler and taps and a plumbed bath. In a comfortable professional household in Bloomsbury in 1879, you will more likely find a hip bath kept in a cupboard, brought out to a bedroom, set on a mat before the fire, and filled by hand from cans. It is 50 years yet before the sort of family that employs you will assume that hot water arrives at the point of use without a person bringing it. 50 years is a long time to be the pipe. Back to the morning then, because the copper is hot, and the timing of what follows is exact. Water for washstands must arrive hot, and it must arrive close to the moment the family want it, and those two facts are in tension, because the family are asleep, and you are not permitted to knock. So the hot water goes up covered, a folded cloth over the mouth of each can to hold the heat, and it is set outside the bedroom doors on the mat, or just inside the door, in houses where that is the rule, and it is placed so that a foot coming out of bed does not find it. The whole delivery must be done quietly enough that nobody is woken by it, and yet late enough that the water is still hot when they rise. You judge it by the hall clock, and by 3 years of knowing that the gentleman of the house rises at 7:15 without variation, and the lady at 8, and the 2 elder children somewhere between, and the youngest whenever the nurse decides. You know these things exactly. You could not describe any of these people's opinions. There is another part of this work, and there is no reason to be coy about it, because it is simply what a house without plumbing upstairs requires. Every bedroom has a washstand with a basin and a jug, and beneath or beside it a chamber pot, and every morning the dirty water and the pots have to come down. This is done with a slop pail, a covered vessel with a lid, and it is done at a particular time and by a particular route and with a particular discipline, which is that it is never seen and never met. You do not carry a slop pail on the main stairs, you do not carry it past an open door, you do not set it down where anyone might come upon it. It goes down the back stairs to the scullery, and it is emptied, and the vessels are rinsed and scalded and returned, and the whole operation leaves no trace of itself anywhere in the house. That discipline is not squeamishness on your part. It is the same principle that governs the shutters and the back stairs and the soft shoes. The house is engaged in a very large and very consistent pretense that the human body's ordinary requirements are met without anyone attending to them, and you are the person who maintains that pretense, and you maintain it by moving at the right hours along the right corridors with the lid on. By 6:20 the copper is drawn down and refilled. The cans for the first 2 bedrooms are standing ready in the passage with their cloths over them, and the scullery floor has a wet patch where you set the pail. Your forearms have that particular ache that comes from carrying weight with a straight arm, low down, and your right shoulder is worse than your left because you favor it without meaning to. You come up into the hall and stop for a moment, which is not permitted and takes 4 seconds. The fan light over the front door has gone from black to a thin, dirty grey, the color of dishwater, and through it you can make out the shape of the railings and the top of the plane tree in the square. A cart goes past, slow, the horse's hooves loose and unhurried on the road. The hall clock ticks with that particular loudness clocks have when nothing else in a house is making any noise at all. Then you take up your pail and your hearthstone and go to the front door, because the step has to be done before the street can see you doing it. The front door opens onto 4 stone steps and a small square of pavement, and those 4 steps are, in a sense, the most closely examined surface in the entire house. You unbolt the door quietly, top bolt, then bottom, and set the latch so it will not swing and bang. The cold comes in at you all at once, a different cold from the kitchen's, damp and moving, carrying the smell of coal smoke from 3,000 chimneys that have all been lit within the last 2 hours. Bloomsbury, at 6:25, smells like the inside of a chimney and tastes faintly of iron. You kneel on a folded sack at the top step with the pail beside you. First the broom, short-handled, working the grit and the horse dung and the fragments of straw down from the top step to the bottom and out onto the pavement and then off the curb entirely, because a step swept only halfway is worse than one not swept at all. Then the wet cloth, going over the stone to lift what the broom would not. Then the hearthstone. Hearthstone is a soft white block, sold by the piece from a barrow or by the donkey cart man who trades it for rags and bones, and it is essentially chalk with a little pipe clay in it. You wet the stone, you wet the step, and you draw the block across the surface in long overlapping strokes until the wet stone comes up an even matte white. Then you finish the edges. The edging is the part that matters. A clean step with a smudged edge tells the street that the girl who did it was in a hurry, and a girl in a hurry means a household that does not keep enough servants for the work it has, and that is a piece of information no family in this square wishes to broadcast at 6:30 in the morning. This is worth slowing down for, because from the pavement it looks like nothing at all. A white step. Who could possibly care about a white step? Everyone in the street cares. That is the answer, and it is not an exaggeration. In a London terrace, the front step is the one part of a private house that is permanently on public display, and it is therefore the only evidence the neighbors have of what goes on behind the door. A house with a grey step, or a step whitened 3 days ago and gone patchy at the corners, is a house where something has slipped. Perhaps the family has let a servant go. Perhaps there is illness. Perhaps there is a bill unpaid, and the coal is being rationed, and the girl is being worked at other things. Nobody in the square will ask. They will simply observe, and they will draw their conclusions, and the conclusions will travel through the servants of 6 houses before 9 in the morning, because the servants speak to each other at the area railings and at the baker's cart, and they miss nothing. So the step is a signal, and the signal is being transmitted by you, on your knees, at the cost of about 12 minutes and a wet apron, every single morning of your life, including Sundays. The neighborhood enforces its own standards without any formal machinery whatsoever. There is no rule, no law, no written instruction from your mistress. There is only the fact that every other step in the terrace is white by 7, and yours must be too, and if it is not, someone will remark on it to your mistress at a morning call, gently, in the manner of a kindness, and your mistress will come down the kitchen stairs, which she does perhaps once a fortnight, and there will be a conversation you would very much rather not have. You finish the bottom step. You wring the cloth into the pail and take a moment to look at the row of steps stretching away up the terrace in the grey light. 11 of them are already white, 2 are not, and one of those belongs to a house where the family has gone into the country and left only a caretaker, and everyone knows it, and it is forgiven. Now the brass. There is a good deal of brass on a Bloomsbury front door, and every piece of it turns green if left alone for 3 days. The letter plate, the knocker, which in this house is a plain ring, not a lion, because a lion is thought a little vulgar for a solicitor's family. The bell pull, which is a brass handle on a rod running back through the wall to a wire and a bell in the passage below. The number plate, the 2 small escutcheons around the keyhole, and the boot scraper set into the wall beside the door, which is iron rather than brass, but which must be cleaned out with a stick, because otherwise last week's mud has set in it like mortar. You use a paste and a cloth, and the paste is largely rotten stone with a little oil, and the trick with brass is that it wants pressure more than it wants product. You work the paste on, you let it dull, you take it off with a dry cloth, and then you polish with a second dry cloth until your arm complains. The letter plate takes longest because it has a hinge, and the hinge has corners, and the corners hold the paste, and dried paste in a corner is exactly as visible as tarnish, which is the sort of detail nobody explains to you and everybody notices. While you do this, you are standing on the pavement with your back to the street, in a print dress with the sleeves pushed up and a coarse apron over it, and you are visible to anyone who passes. There are rules about that, and they are not written down either. You do not turn round to look at people. You do not call out. You do not stand talking at the railings for longer than it takes to hand up a jug, though in practice, every housemaid in the terrace stretches this considerably, and you all know exactly how far it can be stretched. If a gentleman of the household's acquaintance passes and greets you, you answer briefly and go on working. You do not curtsy in the street, which would be absurd, but you do not meet his eye at length either. If your mistress passes, which she will not at this hour, you stand aside and wait. And you finish before 7, or as near to it as you can manage, because between 7 and 1/2 the street begins to fill with people going to their offices, and a housemaid, still on her knees, at the step at 7:15, is a housemaid who is behind. Even that is a signal. Even that gets read. The work is not hidden exactly. It happens in full view, but it is understood to be invisible, in the sense that a person of the class that lives behind these doors will pass 50 women doing it on the way to Holborn, and register none of them, and this is the arrangement everybody has agreed to. Inside the hall, there is more. The hall floor is oilcloth, a printed canvas coated in linseed oil, patterned to imitate tiles, because real tiles are expensive, and oilcloth from a shop in Tottenham Court Road is not. It is swept, and then it is wiped over with a damp flannel, and about once a week it is given a very little milk on the cloth, which sounds like a superstition and is in fact perfectly sensible, since it feeds the oil and brings the pattern up. Too much, and it goes sticky and smells. You have learned the amount. There are mats, one outside the door, one inside it, one at the foot of the stairs. All 3 are taken up, carried through to the back area and beaten against the wall, which produces a cloud of grey dust that hangs in the cold air and then settles on you. There is the umbrella stand, which is a china cylinder with a metal drip tray in the bottom, and the drip tray holds water and grit and must be emptied, and there are 4 umbrellas and 2 walking sticks in it that are never all there at once, and whose absences you keep track of without being asked. And there are the boots. The family put their boots out on the landing at night, or the master does, and the boy is meant to fetch them, and the boy is 13 and often has not. So you collect them on your way through. The master's town boots, still carrying the pale film of London mud that dries grey and gets into the stitching. A pair of the mistress's, with buttons, 12 buttons on each, which will need the hook and a careful hand. The boys' school boots, which are in a condition that would be comic if you were not the person dealing with it. You carry them down to the scullery and set them in a row for later, and later is only 30 minutes off, and there are 7 pairs. By now, the trade has begun to arrive. Not at the front door, never at the front door. Every one of them comes down the steps to the area, below street level, to the door beside the coal cellar, and this is absolute, and a tradesman who mistakes it and rings the front bell will be spoken to about it once and will not do it again. The milkman comes first with his yoke and 2 churns, and he measures out into the household jug with a pint dipper on a long handle, and you rinse the jug before he fills it, because he will not. And there is a running and entirely unresolvable argument in every kitchen in London about whether the measure is honest. Then the baker, with the loaves in a long basket on his hip, warm still, and you take 4. Then, on the days he comes, the coalman, and his arrival is announced by the sound of the plate in the pavement being lifted, and then by a noise like the end of the world as 300 weight goes down the chute into the cellar, and a fine black dust comes up between the boards and settles on everything in the passage you have just wiped. You will do the passage again. Of course you will. But not yet. The kitchen clock says 7, or near enough, and there is bread and dripping on the table, and for the next 10 minutes you are permitted to sit down. 10 minutes. That is the shape of it, and you know the shape without looking at the clock, because you have been measuring this particular 10 minutes for 3 years now, and your body knows when it is nearly done. You sit at the long deal table in the kitchen, on the side away from the range, because the side nearest the range belongs to the cook, and always has. The table is scrubbed white by years of scouring, and there are marks in it your predecessors made, a burn near the corner, a groove worn where knives have been sharpened against the edge by somebody who was told not to. In front of you is a thick slice of yesterday's loaf and a dish of dripping from the joint of 2 days ago, the good brown jelly at the bottom of it already spooned out and gone to whoever got there first. You did not get there first. You never get there first. There is tea. It is strong, and it has been standing, and it is the second use of leaves that were already used at 6 by the cook, and it tastes of the tin the leaves live in. You drink it hot and fast, because hot and fast is the only way anything is drunk down here. This is your breakfast. It is not a small meal by the standards of the street outside, and you should be clear about that, because the thing most easily misunderstood about service is the food. A girl in a factory in the same year is buying her own bread out of a wage that will not stretch to butter. You are fed. Whatever else is true about this house, and a good deal is true about it that you would not say aloud, you are fed 4 times a day, and the meat appears on the servant's table with a regularity that your mother, in a cottage in Hertfordshire, with 6 children and a labourer's income, would consider close to miraculous. Now, who is sitting with you? There are 6 indoor servants in this house, and the arrangement of them is not casual, and it is not friendship, and it is not decided by who is nicest or who has been here longest. It is a ranking, and everybody in the room knows their place in it to the inch. The cook is first. She is 38, and she has been in service since she was 12, and she earns £30 a year, nearly double what you have, and she is not answerable to you or to anybody except the mistress, and even the mistress approaches her carefully. The kitchen is hers. The range is hers. The larder key hangs at her waist and does not leave it. When she sits at the head of the table nearest the fire, and there is no discussion about this, and there never has been. Below her, and this is where it becomes interesting, the ranking splits into 2 lines that do not quite meet. There is the kitchen line, which is the cook and the kitchen maid under her, and there is the house line, which is the parlour maid and yourself and the nursemaid, and there is the boy, who is below everybody including, in his own estimation, the cat. The parlour maid is 24 and earns £20, and she outranks you, and the mechanism of that is worth understanding, because it is not about the work being harder, it is about where the work is seen. She waits at table. She opens the front door. She carries the tea tray into the drawing room and is looked at, briefly, by visitors. Her hands must be presentable in a way yours need not be, and so she does not black grates and she does not carry coal. And this division is the whole of the difference between you. She handles the family. You handle the house before the family is in it. Visibility is the currency, and she has more of it. The nursemaid sits slightly apart from this, socially and often physically, because she eats with the children more often than she eats with you, and this puts her in an odd position that nobody has ever fully resolved. She has authority in the nursery that nobody downstairs can touch. She has none at all outside it. The kitchen maid is 16, and she shares your attic, and she is below you, and this is the one that sits least comfortably, because you like her, and she is the only person in this house you talk to properly, and yet when the cook wants a thing carried, you both know who will carry it. She sleeps 3 feet from you, and she came from a village 9 miles from yours, and neither of those facts alters the order at the table. And the boy. He is 14. He does boots when you do not. He carries coal. He goes on errands. He eats an enormous amount of bread, and he earns £8 a year, with everything found, and he is spoken to by every single person in this room, in the tone that is used for boys. In a grander house than this, the ranking would be more elaborate, and it would come with its own architecture. A house with 15 or 20 indoors would have a housekeeper and a butler at the top of it, and they would not eat with you at all. There, the upper servants take the first course in the servants' hall with everybody else, and then rise and process out to the housekeeper's room for the rest of the meal, carrying their own pudding with them, and the lower servants remain behind. This is not a joke, and it was not thought absurd at the time. It was called, in a phrase that has always seemed to me perfect, the pug's parlour, and the upper servants were the pugs, and the procession happened every day, and a housemaid of 19 in such a place would eat her second course with the boot boy and the scullery maid, and would think it entirely natural. This house is too small for that. 6 of you at one table, and the cook at the top of it, and that is the whole hierarchy made visible in the seating. The food itself is reckoned as part of what you are paid, and the employers of the period reckoned it quite precisely. A servant's board in a middle-class London house of the 1870s was commonly valued at somewhere between £12 and £20 a year, which is to say that the food you are eating and the bed you sleep in are worth more, in the household's accounts, than the money that reaches your hand. Add the beer allowance, or the shilling a week paid in place of it, which is now the more usual arrangement in a house like this. Add the tea and sugar, which some houses give in kind and some give as a small allowance because it stops the leaves walking. The total cost of you, to this family, is something near £30 a year, and only 16 of it is your wage. Which means that when the mistress remarks, as she has been known to remark, that servants are dear now and were not so dear when she was a girl, she is not talking about your £16. She is talking about the coal, the bread, the meat, the boots, the candles, and the space in the house, and she is correct that it has all gone up, and she is not going to raise your £16. The talk at the table is quick, because it has to be. There is news, of a sort. Somebody's sister has got a place in Kensington at £18, and everybody has an opinion about whether that is good, and the cook's opinion is that Kensington is full of people who let their servants go out on Sunday evenings and come to a bad end, and the cook says this every time. There is complaint, which is the main business of the meal, and it is highly specific, and it is never general. Nobody at this table says that service is hard. Everybody at this table says that the master's second boots have soles like a barn door, that whoever last used the housemaid's box put the emery paper back damp, that the nursery fire smokes when the wind is in the east, and has done since before any of you came, and that if the mistress orders a made dish for 6, on a Thursday again, there will be words. And there is the actual work of the meal, which is the negotiation. This is the part that no advice manual describes, because no advice manual admits it happens. The written arrangement of duties in a household of this size is neat, and it is set out by the mistress, and it is roughly nonsense. The real arrangement is made here, over bread and dripping, in about 90 seconds, and it consists of the kitchen maid saying she will do the lamps if you will do the knives, and you saying you will, and the parlour maid saying she cannot do the breakfast room until the fire has drawn, and can somebody see to it, and the boy being told what he is doing rather than asked. 6 people who know exactly how long each task takes, adjusting the day so that all of it lands before it is due. Nobody upstairs will ever know this conversation occurred. Its entire purpose is that they should not. The cook finishes first. She always finishes first, and her standing up ends the meal for everybody, whether they have finished or not, and this too is part of the ranking. You put the last of the bread in your mouth. You take your cup to the scullery. And as you turn, you look, without meaning to, at the row of bells high on the wall of the passage, each with its little painted label, and the wires running back into the plaster. They are still. They will not be still for very much longer. 7:30. The scullery is the coldest room in the house, and it is where you will spend the next 40 minutes, because the work that comes now is dirty work, and dirty work happens where the family will never smell it. The boots are already waiting for you, set out in a row on a sheet of newspaper by the back door, collected from outside the bedroom doors before you laid the breakfast table. There are 7 pairs this morning, the master's town boots, which are the important ones, the master's second pair, kept for the days when the first are drying, the mistress's walking boots, which came back last evening, with the whole of Bedford Place printed up the sides of them in a grey London slurry that has now dried to something between clay and cement. 2 pairs belonging to the elder children, a pair of small ones, and the boy's own boots, which are not really your responsibility, but which you will do anyway, because he is 14, and he did the coal for you on Tuesday, without being asked. London mud is not mud in the country sense. It is street sweepings and coal ash and horse and the fine black grit that settles out of the air over a city burning several million tons of coal a year, and it has the particular quality of drying hard and then, when brushed, becoming airborne again in a cloud that settles on everything within reach. This is why boots are done in the scullery, with the door to the kitchen shut. It is also why you do them before you change your apron, and not after. The method has 3 stages, and there is no shortening it. First, the dry brush, a stiff bristle, taking off the crust in flakes into the newspaper. Then the damp cloth for what the brush would not lift, and the small pointed stick for the welt, the seam where the sole meets the upper, where the dirt packs in and stays and, if left there, rots the stitching within a season. Then the blacking, which comes in a stone jar and smells of turpentine and lamp black and something sweetish underneath, applied with a small brush, worked in, left a minute, and then polished off with a second brush, and finally with a cloth wrapped round your knuckles until the leather comes up with a shine you can see the window in. The master's boots get the full treatment. The children's get the abbreviated one. You know exactly which corners can be cut and which cannot, and the distinction is not about the boots. It is about who will look at them. Your fingers are black to the second joint by the time you finish, and the blacking does not come off with soap. It comes off over about 3 days, fading, and then it goes back on again, so that in practice, your hands in service are never entirely clean and never entirely dirty, but hold a permanent grey undertone in the creases and around the nails. Girls in service knew this about each other on sight. So did everybody else. A woman could be identified at a distance by her hands as reliably as by her dress. Next, the knives. Here is something that vanished so completely from domestic life that it takes a moment to reconstruct. Stainless steel does not exist yet. It will not exist in any commercial form until the years just before the Great War, some 35 years from this morning. Every knife in this house is carbon steel, and carbon steel does 2 things when it meets food. It stains, particularly from anything acid, so a blade that has touched a lemon or a pickle or an egg comes away blotched brown and blue. And it rusts, given a night in a damp scullery drawer, in small orange freckles that will pit the surface if they are allowed to sit. So the knives are cleaned every single day, and cleaning does not mean washing. It means abrading. It means taking a fine quantity of metal off the blade, by hand, with a mild grit, and this is done to every knife in the house, every day, for the entire working life of that knife, which is why the old ones in the servant's drawer are narrower than the new ones upstairs. You can date a household knife by how much of it is gone. The tool is a knife board, a plank of wood faced with buff leather, and the grit is Bath brick, a block of fine baked silt from Somerset that you scrape into powder with the edge of a blade and scatter along the leather. Then you take each knife by the handle, lay it flat, and draw it back and forth along the board, turning it until the steel comes up bright and the stains are gone. It takes perhaps 40 seconds a knife if the knife has been used lightly, and considerably longer if somebody had fish. A word about the handles, because they are the trap. The handles are bone or ivory or horn, and they are attached to the tang with a resin cement that softens in hot water, so the blades may be washed and the handles may not, ever, and a maid who drops a set of table knives into a basin of hot water to save time has ruined every one of them, and there is not a housekeeper in England who has not told that story to a new girl within her first week. You hold the knife by the handle, and you keep the handle out of everything. You have done it so many times now that you could not do it wrongly if you tried. Larger houses have a knife machine, a drum affair on the scullery table with leather-lined slots and a crank handle, where you feed the blades in around the circumference and turn the handle, and the whole set is cleaned in a couple of minutes rather than a quarter of an hour. This house does not have one. The mistress considered it and priced it and decided that what it saved was your time, and your time is already paid for at £16 a year. That decision is worth sitting with because it explains a great deal about the way this house works and the way 100,000 houses like it work. Almost nothing in this building can simply be owned. Nearly every object in it requires regular hand labor merely to remain in the condition it was in when it was bought. The steel wants abrading, the brass wants polishing, or it goes green. The silver wants cleaning, or it goes yellow, then black. The grates want blackleading, or they rust. The boots want blacking, or they crack. The copper pans want scouring with salt and vinegar and sand. The oilcloth in the hall wants washing and then a rubbing of milk to bring the shine back. The mahogany wants beeswax and turpentine and an hour with a cloth. The linen wants starch and a hot iron and a mangle. The lamps, in a moment, will want everything. None of this is decoration. This is not a house being made beautiful. This is a house being held at a standstill against the ordinary decay of materials in a damp climate under a coal smoke sky, and the entire force that holds it there is 6 pairs of hands, of which yours are 2. And there is a reason nobody upstairs perceives it as labor, which is that maintenance produces no visible result. If you do it, the house looks the way it looked yesterday. If you do not do it, the house looks worse. The only observable outcome of a whole morning's work is the absence of change. This is why service is spoken of as though it were a form of existence rather than a form of work, and why a mistress may say, without any sense of saying something strange, that she keeps 6 servants, in the same tone she would use for keeping a carriage. The lamps. You bring them through from the front rooms, 2 at a time, and set them on the scullery bench, and this is a task you would not hand to anybody who was tired or in a hurry, because it is the one that can go badly. Each lamp comes apart. The glass chimney lifts off. The globe, if there is one, lifts off. The burner unscrews from the reservoir. You empty what is left of yesterday's oil, wipe the reservoir out with a rag, and refill it from the can, not to the brim, because oil expands in a warm room, and an overfull reservoir weeps down the outside, and then the whole thing smells, and worse, catches the dust. Then the wick. A wick that has burned all evening has a hard black crust along its edge, and if you simply light it again, it will burn crooked and smoke and blacken the inside of the chimney within 20 minutes, and the mistress will remark on it. So you trim it, with a small pair of scissors kept for that purpose, absolutely straight across, or with the corners taken off in the way the maker recommends, and you do it evenly, because 1/8 of an inch of unevenness at this end becomes a smear of soot on the ceiling by 9 in the evening. Then the chimney, which is the delicate part. You wash it in warm water with a little soda, and you dry it, and you polish the inside with a screw of soft paper wound round a stick, and the glass is thin, and it is warm, and it has spent the night at a temperature that puts strain into it, and every housemaid in London has at some point felt one go, quietly, in her hands. You keep spares in the cupboard. There are 4 in there now. There were 6 in September. The rag you have used for the reservoirs is greasy with oil, and it does not go in with the other rags. It goes in the tin box by the back door, and it goes out with the ash. And the reason for that particular rule has been explained to you once, in a flat voice, by the cook, and you have never needed to be told twice. 16 minutes, if nothing goes wrong. Nothing goes wrong. You carry the lamps back through, trimmed and filled and clear, set them exactly where they stood, and by this evening they will be lit and nobody will look at them at all, which is the point, because a lamp that is noticed is a lamp that is smoking. Back in the scullery, you wash your hands under the tap in cold water with the yellow soap, and you do it twice, and you look at them afterwards in the grey light from the high window, blacking under the nails, a shine of oil in the palm creases, a scorch mark across 2 knuckles from Sunday. The clean apron is on its hook. It is 7:45. In 15 minutes those hands will be carrying in the coffee. The breakfast room is at the back of the ground floor, and it faces east. And at this hour in November, that means almost nothing. But in June, it means the room fills with a hard, early light that shows every mark on the glass. Today the room is dim and cold and smells faintly of last night's fire, which was let out at 11 and has been raked and laid again since 5:30, and which you will light now before anything else, because the room must be warm when the family comes down, and a fire laid at 8 is a fire barely alight at 5:30. You light it, and you wait the 30 seconds it takes to know whether it has caught, and it has, and you go to the windows. The shutters fold back into their casings with a sound the house has made every morning for 60 years. You unbar them, you fold them, you push them flat into the paneling, and you set the catch. Then the blinds, which are the ones with the brass acorn pulls. And the rule is that they come to exactly the level of the top sash bar and no lower, because a blind hanging crooked is the kind of thing a mistress will notice from the doorway without being able to say what she has noticed. She will only feel that the room is wrong. That feeling, the vague sense that something is not as it should be, is the enemy. Your whole morning has been organized to prevent it. Then the table. The cloth first, and the cloth is damask, and it has been folded since Monday in a particular way so that the creases fall along the length of the table and not across it. You lay it with the crease down the center, and you run your palm along it, and the center crease should sit directly over the center of the table, which sounds like fussiness and is not, because if it sits an inch off, every place setting measured from the edge will be an inch off, and the whole table will look shrugged. 4 places this morning: master, mistress, the 2 eldest, the younger children breakfasting upstairs with the nursemaid, plates warmed at the range and carried in a cloth, knives, forks, spoons, the small ones for the eggs, cups and saucers, the cruet with the salt and the mustard and the pepper, which was refilled last night, and which sits 11 inches from the head of the table, and has sat 11 inches from the head of the table for as long as anyone in this house can remember, because the master reaches for it without looking, and has never once had to look. The chafing dishes go on the sideboard, over their spirit lamps, and the lamps are lit 5 minutes before the food comes up, so that the metal is warm, and the food does not cool the moment it is set down. Bacon in one, kidneys in another, though only the master eats them. A dish of eggs kept covered, the toast in the rack, and the rack is the thing that will defeat you if you let it, because toast made too early goes leathery, and toast made too late arrives limp, and the correct moment for toast is not a time on a clock, it is a judgment made by listening to the ceiling. The marmalade in its dish, not its jar. The butter, cut and shaped and set on ice in the larder overnight, brought through at the last possible second. The cream, the milk in a separate jug, because the eldest takes milk and the mistress takes cream, and this has never been said aloud to you. This room is not entirely yours. The parlour maid carries in and serves and stands at the sideboard and takes the plates away and answers the bell in here. You lay and you clear and you clean, and she attends. In a house with 6 indoor servants, those 2 jobs sit close enough together that the line between them gets rubbed at, and the line is defended on both sides with a politeness that has an edge under it. She has been here 2 years longer than you. She does not carry coal. That distinction matters enormously to her, and it costs her about £4 a year in extra wages, and you understand exactly why she keeps it sharp, because if there were nothing between the 2 jobs, there would be no reason to pay one of them more. Here is the thing this room exists to prove. The family who will sit down at this table in 20 minutes do not believe that anyone has been awake since 4:45. They know it, in the way you know the sun is a great distance away. It is a fact they could recite. But they do not believe it, in the sense of holding it in their minds while they butter their toast, and the reason they do not is that you have spent 3 hours making it impossible to believe. There is no ash on the hearth. There is no water on the stairs, though you carried 9 cans up them. There is no smell of blacklead, though you handled it at 5:30, and no smell of lamp oil, though you were breathing it at 7:30. And this is why you washed twice, and this is why there is a clean apron. The doorstep is white, the brass is bright, the fire is drawing, the coffee is coming. And nothing anywhere in this room carries any evidence at all that a person did these things with her hands. That absence is the product, not the clean grate, not the laid table, the absence. A wealthy household in this period is not buying labor exactly. Labor can be bought in a factory. What a household of this class is buying is the appearance of a life in which labor has not been necessary, and the strange arithmetic of that is that the better the work, the more completely the worker disappears. A footman who spills soup is remembered for a decade. A housemaid who never once, in 4 years, allows a grate to be cold is remembered by nobody, including herself, because there is no event in it. The reward for doing this work perfectly is that it looks as though it was never done. You are not resentful of this at 8 in the morning. You will have opinions later, at the servants' table, and some of them will be very sharp. But standing here now, setting a spoon straight, what you feel is closer to craft. You are good at this. The room is right. You can tell it is right the way a carpenter can tell a joint is tight. The listening now becomes the main work. You stand still in the doorway of the breakfast room with your head slightly turned, and you take in the house through the ceiling. Water running upstairs. A door. The particular creak on the second landing that means someone has come out of the front bedroom. The nursemaid's voice. Very faint. 2 floors up. Toast now. You go down the back stairs, faster than you came up, and the toast is made at the range, and the coffee comes off and is poured into the hot pot, and the eggs come out of their water at the moment the pot is filled, and everything travels up together on the tray, and the whole operation is timed against the sound of feet on a staircase you cannot see. Coffee that has stood is bitter. Coffee that has been kept hot for 10 minutes tastes of tin. Eggs held back go hard in their shells. There is no way to do this early, and no forgiveness for doing it late, and the only tool you have for the problem is your ears. Everything reaches the sideboard. The spirit lamps are lit. The covers go on. And then, in the passage, with perhaps 90 seconds in hand, you change. The morning print dress stays, but the coarse apron comes off and goes over your arm, and the clean white one goes on, and it is starched, and it has a bib, and the strings cross behind and tie in front, and you have tied them so many thousand times that you do it without thought while walking. The cap goes on. You check the cap in the small square of looking glass that is screwed to the wall by the service door at exactly the height it is, in every house of this kind in London, for exactly this purpose. The girl in that glass is not the same girl who was on her knees at a grate at 5:20. She is smooth and white and quiet, and, in the fullest sense the household requires, decorative. The transformation takes 40 seconds and it is total, and the two versions of you never occupy the same room at the same time, and that too is part of the product. Then the rules, which nobody will write down for you, and which you learned in your first fortnight by being corrected. You do not speak first. If the mistress addresses you, you answer briefly, and you use her title. If she does not, you say nothing at all, though you may be within 4 feet of her, for a quarter of an hour. You stand aside. If a member of the family is coming along a passage, you stop, and you draw back against the wall, and you let them pass. And in a good many houses of this period, the instruction is more particular than that, and you are expected to turn and face the wall until they have gone by. This house is not so strict. The mistress finds it theatrical, but the housemaid in the household 2 doors down does it every day of her life, and neither of you thinks it remarkable. You do not carry anything up the front stairs that could be carried up the back. You do not look at the letters on the hall table, though you place them there. You knock, always, and you wait, and you do not knock twice. And you do not appear in the breakfast room now, unless you are sent for, because it is 3 minutes to 9, the fire is drawing well, the covers are warm, the parlour-maid is at the sideboard with her hands behind her, and above you, on the front stairs, somebody has begun to come down. Step back from the passage for a while. The fire will keep. The house will keep. Before that bell rings, it is worth understanding how a girl comes to be standing in a basement passage in Bloomsbury at 3 minutes to 9 in the morning, in a clean apron, waiting. You were not born here. Almost nobody in service was born in the house they served in, and a very large number of them were not born in London at all. You came from a village in Hertfordshire, one of thousands of girls moving along the same rail lines in the same decade, and you came because there were 8 of you at home, and your father earned 14 shillings a week as an agricultural labourer, and because at 14 you were an expense, and at 15 you could be a wage. That is not a bitter way of putting it. It is simply the arithmetic your mother did at the kitchen table, and she did it without resentment, because she had been sent out herself at 13 and thought 15 was generous. The first place was not this one. The first place is almost never a house with 6 indoor servants. The first place was a shopkeeper's household in the same county, a man with a wife and 4 children and 1 girl to do everything, and that girl was you. They called it being a general servant. The phrase is polite. What it meant was that you rose at 5:30 and lit the fire and carried the water and cooked the plain meals and washed the clothes and scrubbed the floors and minded the youngest, and there was nobody above you to teach you, and nobody below you to help, and you earned £6 a year. You stayed there 20 months. Then you found this. Finding a place worked in one of 3 ways, and the way it worked for you tells you something about how the whole system held together. The first way was word of mouth, which was much the commonest. A cook in one house has a sister in another, and a housemaid is leaving to be married, and the news travels along a network of women who have never been introduced to one another, and who nevertheless know a great deal about which households pay promptly and which mistress counts the candle ends. That network is the real labor market. It is invisible on paper, and it is more reliable than anything printed. The second way was the registry office, which is what you would call an employment agency. You paid a fee, sometimes a shilling, sometimes more, to have your name entered in a book, and a lady looking for a housemaid paid a fee to consult it. Some registries were honest. A good many were not, and existed chiefly to take shillings from girls who were never sent to a single interview. Reformers wrote about this repeatedly through the 1870s and got very little done about it. The third way was advertisement, in the newspapers, in a column of type so compressed it reads now like a code. Wanted, a housemaid, Protestant, early riser, must be a good needlewoman, no followers. You came by the second way, and you sat in a front room in the Tottenham Court Road with your hands in your lap, while a woman you had never seen asked you your age, your church, your last place, and whether you could get up in the morning. And then she asked for your character. Here is the part of the arrangement that governs everything else, and it is worth slowing down for, because without it, none of the rest of this makes sense. A character was a written reference from your previous mistress, not from your previous employer's steward, not from an agency, not from a fellow servant, from the mistress herself, in her own hand, testifying to your honesty, your sobriety, your cleanliness, your temper, and the length of your service. You could not get a place without one. That was not a custom or a preference. That was the practical law of the whole occupation, understood by every household in Britain. A girl who arrived without a character was assumed to have been dismissed for theft or drunkenness, and no respectable house would take her. And your mistress was under no obligation whatever to give you one. She could refuse. She could give you a lukewarm one, which was worse than a refusal, because it could not be argued with. She could write 4 lines that said you were clean and honest, and add nothing about your temper, and any woman reading it would understand exactly what the omission meant. There was no board of appeal, no arbitration, no procedure. A dispute over wages, a refusal to accept a change in your duties, an argument you happened to be right about, could end with a character that quietly closed the trade to you. So a great deal of what looks like deference in a Victorian servant is not deference at all. It is a woman protecting the only document that makes her employable, in an occupation where a bad month can put her on the street with a box and no reference. When you stand aside in the passage, part of what you are standing aside for is that letter. The mistress of this house is not a cruel woman. She has never threatened you with your character and would think it vulgar to do so. But the threat does not need to be spoken. It is simply the shape of the ground you both stand on, and you both know it is there, and neither of you will ever mention it. Now, the money, which people always want to know about, and which is almost meaningless without comparison. You are paid £16 a year, quarterly, which comes to £4 at each quarter day. That is your entire cash income. Against that, The cook in this kitchen is on £30, and she has been in service 22 years, and could get 35 if she chose to move. The kitchen maid, who is 17 and sleeps 3 feet from you, is on 11. The parlour maid, who is trusted with the plate and is seen constantly by the family, and is therefore selected partly for her appearance and her voice, is on 20. There is a nursemaid at 18, and a boy who does the boots and the coal and the errands and is paid £8 and his keep, and who is 13. 6 people, and rather less than £110 a year between them in wages. The master of this house, a barrister, earns somewhere near 800 a year and considers himself comfortable rather than rich. The rent on the house is close to 120. The coal, as you know better than he does, runs to 15 or so. The wages of the entire indoor staff, the people without whom the house cannot function at all, come to about 1/7 of what he earns and are one of the smaller items on the list. That is not an accident of this household. That is the economics that made the Victorian middle-class house possible. Labour was the cheapest thing a family could buy. But the £16 is not the whole of it, and it would be dishonest to leave it there. You also get your bed, your board, your coal, your candles, and your beer money, which in this house is paid in cash at 1 shilling a week because the mistress disapproves of servants drinking beer at dinner. Contemporaries reckoned a servant's keep at somewhere between £15 and £25 a year, depending on the house. So your real compensation is perhaps double what appears in the account book, and unlike a factory girl on 12 shillings a week, you do not pay rent, and you do not go hungry, and you do not lose a week's income when trade slackens. That is the bargain, and a great many girls took it deliberately and with their eyes open. Security, in exchange for your hours, your privacy, and your name. What does the £16 actually do? Some of it goes home. Not all of it, and not by any rule, but you send something at Christmas and something in the spring, and it is understood without being discussed. Some of it goes on boots, which wear out fast on London pavements and are not provided. Some goes on print for a morning dress, since the material for that is yours to find, and on cotton and thread and the endless small mending. A little goes on the box under your bed, which is a real box with a real lock, and holds, at present, £2 11 shillings, and a small quantity of hope, because the arithmetic that most housemaids do at 19 is the arithmetic of how much a girl ought to have saved before she marries. And the scale of all this is the last thing to hold, because it is easy to imagine service as a picturesque corner of the period, and it was nothing of the sort. In the census returns of this decade, domestic service is the largest single occupation for women in Britain, and by a wide margin. More than 1 million people are employed in it. Something like 1 working woman in 3 is a servant of some description. In London, the proportion is higher still. The girl on the omnibus, the girl at the pillar box, the girl on the area steps of the house opposite, all of them are you in a different apron. You are not unusual. You are the most ordinary thing in the country. And it is 9 o'clock. Somewhere above your head, in the row of little painted labels on the board in the passage, a wire tightens and a bell begins to swing, and the sound of it is thin and unhurried and entirely impossible to ignore. The board hangs in the passage between the kitchen and the scullery, and it is the most honest object in the house. 10 little painted labels in a row, each with a small brass bell above it, and a coiled wire running up behind the plaster to a room you clean but do not live in. Front bedroom, back bedroom, dressing room, nursery, study, drawing room, dining room, breakfast room, morning room, front door. When a handle is pulled 3 floors above you, the wire draws tight, the bell swings, and beneath it, a small brass pendulum keeps swinging for a while after the sound has stopped, so that if you were elsewhere when it rang, you can still come and see which one has been asking for you. That detail is worth sitting with for a moment, because it tells you what the system was for. The bell does not simply summon, it records. It leaves evidence that a call was made, and if you did not answer it, there is a small quivering brass finger in the passage pointing out exactly which summons you failed. The first bell this morning is the front bedroom, and it means hot water. You have the can ready because you have had the can ready since 8:30. It has been standing on the range shelf where the heat is steady, with a folded cloth over the top to hold the warmth, and you lift it now and find it heavy in the way you have long since stopped noticing. Up the back stairs, along the landing, and at the bedroom door you stop, and you knock, and you wait, and you do not go in until you are told to. There are rules for the entry, and they are precise enough that they can be written down, and they were, in a dozen manuals of household management that you have never read, but whose contents you absorbed from an older housemaid in your first place before you were 16. You come in quietly. You set the can in the washstand basin, and you lay the cloth over it. You draw back the curtains if you are asked, and not if you are not. You do not look at the bed. You do not remark upon the weather unless spoken to first. You do not begin a sentence. If the mistress of the house wishes to speak to you, she will speak, and then you will answer, and then you will finish and go. In some houses, the rule goes further. There were households, and not only grand ones, where a maid, encountering a member of the family on the stairs, was expected to stand still and turn her face to the wall until they had passed. It sounds theatrical now. It was practical, in its own logic. The instruction was not really about the face. It was about establishing that you were not a person who might be encountered, and therefore not a person who might have to be acknowledged, and therefore not a person whose presence created any small social obligation whatsoever. Here is something worth slowing down for, because it is the strangest feature of the whole arrangement, and the one least likely to survive into how we imagine it. You know this family with an intimacy that almost nobody else in the world possesses, and you do not know them at all. You know which side of the bed the master sleeps on, because you turn the mattress and you can see it in the wear. You know that the mistress takes her tea very strong and takes it before she rises. You know that the eldest boy does not eat the fat and leaves it in a small, careful ring on the edge of the plate. You know how much coal the study consumes, and therefore how many hours the study is occupied. You know which of them is sleeping badly, because you empty the washstands, and you carry the linen, and you notice the lamp oil burn down in a room where the lamp should not have been burning. You know their handwriting from the letters on the hall table. You know the sound of every one of their footsteps on the stairs, and you can name them without looking, which is a skill you developed for the same reason a person in the woods learns birdsong, because it tells you what is coming. And you do not know what the master does at his office, beyond that it involves the law. You do not know the mistress's Christian name. You do not know what any of them believe, or fear, or hope, or say to one another when the door is shut, except in fragments, and the fragments are not yours to assemble. The knowledge runs entirely one way, and it runs downward. They know your first name, which they may have changed on your arrival, because the previous housemaid was called something more convenient. They know you are punctual, They do not know your mother is a laundress in Southwark, or that you are the eldest of 6, or that the £2.11 in the box under your bed represents 3 years of not buying things. This is not cruelty on anybody's part. Nobody in the house is being unkind this morning. It is simply what the arrangement is built to produce, and everyone inside it, upstairs and down, has agreed to behave as though the arrangement is the natural order of the world. The second bell goes while you are still on the landing. Back bedroom, and that is morning tea, and after that there is the nursery, and after that the family begins to come down, and the whole house tips over from the state you have spent 4 hours constructing into the state it is meant to appear to have been in all along. And then, once they have gone down to the breakfast room where the covered dishes are hot and the coffee has not stewed and the fire has been alight for well over an hour, you go up and undo the night. Beds are stripped back to air, the blankets folded over the footboards, the mattresses turned on their proper days. Windows are opened, whatever the weather, because the fixed conviction of the period is that a bedroom must be aired, and that closed air is the source of a great deal of trouble. Washstands are emptied, and the slop pail goes down the back stairs. Basins are wiped and refilled. Chamber candlesticks are collected and scraped. Hairbrushes are cleaned. The hearth in each bedroom is swept and laid afresh for the evening. Clothes left over a chair are shaken, brushed and put away, and the small archaeology of the previous evening, the pins, the collar studs, the glass with an inch of water, is gathered and made to disappear. Then the beds are made, and made properly, with the corners squared and the counterpane hanging even on both sides, and by the time the family come up again, there will be no evidence that anyone slept here at all. It is now perhaps 10:15, and you should understand what that means, because it is the point of the whole night we have spent together. Everything you have done since 4:45, every fire, every scuttle, every can of water, every flight of those 5 back staircases, every brass fitting, and every doorstep, and every knife and every lamp, has brought you precisely to the beginning. The day has not started yet. The day starts now. Ahead of you, there is the sweeping and dusting of the ground floor rooms in their proper order. There is the silver. There is the answering of the door in your clean apron, and the carrying up of cards, and the standing at the sideboard through luncheon. There is the changing into black in the afternoon, and the tea things, and the lamps again at dusk, and the bedroom fires, and the warming of the beds and the shutters, and the bolts, and then the last bell, whenever it comes, which may be 11, and may be later. And tomorrow, at 4:45, you will do all of it again, and you will do it 6 days a week, and most of the 7th. With 1 afternoon out a fortnight, and 1 full day a quarter, if the household is generous. There is a window on the second landing, and on your way down, with the slop pail, you stop at it for the length of about 4 breaths, which is as long as you can afford. The street is fully awake now. There is a cart, and a boy with a basket, and 2 women stopped in conversation, with their baskets set down on the pavement between them. The light has come up grey and flat over the roofs opposite, and every one of those houses has had a morning exactly like yours in it, performed by a girl exactly like you, in an attic exactly the size of yours. Hold 2 things at the same time, because they are both true, and neither cancels the other. The first is that you are extremely good at this. The timing alone is a genuine skill, and it took years to acquire. You can judge a fire's draft by sound. You can carry a full can up 2 flights without spilling or breathing hard. You can lay a grate in the dark. You can move through an occupied house without being heard by anyone in it. You can hold the entire schedule of a family of 5 and 6 servants in your head and adjust it silently when one part of it fails. That is competence, and it is real, and it was yours. And some mornings there is a plain satisfaction in a room that has come right. The second is that the arrangement is constructed so that none of it will ever be credited to you. The praise, when there is any, goes to the mistress for keeping a good house. The wage does not rise with the skill. There is no title, no record, no reference to your judgment, only a letter of character that says you were honest, sober, and clean. You will appear in the census as one line, occupation, general servant. That is not a complaint about the family in the breakfast room. It is a description of the structure standing over all of them and all of you. The 2 women on the pavement pick up their baskets and move apart. Behind you, the house is quiet again, in the way it has been quiet all night, which is not the quiet of nothing happening. You lift the pail and you go down.